second session of the Dream Yard Farm to Table sessions. My name is Maya Marie, and I am an urban farmer, chef, lover of all things cooking and growing. And today we're going to be working with sorghum. A little bit of background on me before we get started and get into the meat or the veggies of today's session. I'm from Deep Roots. So Deep Roots is an Afro-Indigenous culinary and agricultural curriculum development project. And we do that through, our mission is to uplift Black and Brown stories of the African and Indigenous diaspora. And we do that through hosting workshops, creating Afro-Indigenous centric curriculum, such as recipes, lesson plans, and other types of media that gets the information out there about Black and Brown food and stories. So today we're going to do some of that as we're going to be learning about sorghum. We'll go a little bit over what we talked about last time in our first session. So in our first session, we looked at making sorghum using sorghum syrup primarily. And sorghum is a grass in the grass family with other grains that you may be familiar with, like rice, wheat. And today we're going to be kind of digging more into the journeys than like the botany of it, and seeing how sorghum has traveled across time and space, across the continents, and digging into that. And last time we did a sorghum glaze, a sorghum barbecue sauce that we put on some roasted chicken, and you can also put that on roasted vegetables as well. So it's a pretty versatile sauce that you can use depending on what you want to add some like depth, sweetness, and sorghum syrup has a lot of vitamins and minerals like iron, magnesium. Today we're going to be working with both sorghum syrup as well as sorghum grains. The grains are really red and they look like this. And sorghum, you can eat it as a whole grain. You can have it in like the syrup to add to sauces like we did last time. Or like today, we're going to be using it in the flour, sorghum flour. So I think we're going to get into making the sorghum muffins. Streusel muffins today, and it's a pretty straightforward recipe. I'm gonna show y'all how to do a regular dairy full version as well as a dairy free or vegan version by substituting the eggs for bananas, substituting the butter for substituting coconut oil for the butter, and then using a plant-based milk for both. Today we're going to be using oat milk, so lots of grains, lots of whole grains going on. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, I'll show y'all, see if I can get to the camera a little bit. You can see the flour here. So we have regular all-purpose white flour. We're doing 1.5 cups of that and 1.5 cups of sorghum flour. And the nice thing about this recipe is that you can just use really one bowl. I'm using a plate for demonstration purposes, but in reality, you can just use one bowl, and that's going to make both your streusel crumb topping as well as the batter. So we're going to put the 1 3/4 cup of flour, white flour, as well as 1 3/4 cup of sorghum flour. And if you don't have sorghum, you can also use any other whole grain flour to substitute for half of the total amount of flour that you have going in. So we just have that. And then we're going to measure out 1.5 cups of some granulated sugar, which is cane sugar. I'm just going to get that into our bowl, like so. And you'll notice that when I'm measuring out the flour, I'm pouring it into the cup. I don't want to scoop the measurement directly into the bowl so that you're getting an accurate measurement of any of the dry ingredients. So for the sugar, we're going to add 1.5 cups. And this might seem like a lot, but it's not. This is for both the batter and for the crumb. And we're going to take out a portion of the dry mix to use as our crumb in a minute. So we're just going to do 1.5 cups of the sugar into the bowl. And then we're going to add in 1/2 cup of our sorghum syrup. So we're just going to pour that into our dry measuring cup, like so. Careful to catch it as it's drizzling. And then just pour that in there. And then we're also going to start to add in our leaveners. So today the leaveners that we're using are baking powder and baking soda. Eggs also act as a leavener, and we'll use that in one of the versions of this recipe, but it's not super necessary if you want to make this completely plant-based, especially since you already have the baking soda and the baking powder adding lift to the flour and the ingredients. So what I'm going to add in here, so far this is what our mix looks like. And the reason why we're adding the sorghum to the dry mix is because it's going to kind of make like that sticky crumbiness that you would have with brown sugar, because brown sugar is a little bit more moister, and we're kind of mimicking that with the sorghum syrup. So we're going to add in 1/2 teaspoon of all of our leaveners. So 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Get that in there. Sprinkle it so that it's evenly distributed. And then we're going to add 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. So that's evenly distributed. And then we're going to add in 1/2 teaspoon of salt, which just enhances the sweeteners in there. It's really good to add salt to baked goods, and you don't need to add a lot for it to really enhance and bring out the flavors and the depth, the earthiness of the sorghum. And then we're also going to add in 1/2 teaspoon of the cinnamon. I put 1/2 teaspoon of the cloves on the recipe. You can adjust that as you want, because cloves is a really strong spice. So I would say as you're making this, just give it a little smell and be like, maybe I want to add more or less. With spices, you can kind of improv. You don't have to totally follow the recipe because it's a flavor. It's meant to be something that you want to, for your own taste level. So you can kind of adjust the spices as you like. I would say go less instead of going more with spices in baked goods, especially ones like cinnamon and nutmeg, which at higher levels can be toxic if you add too much. So I would say if you're going to adjust spices in a baked good, you would more so want to add less than add more. And then, so I'm just going to add just about like rather than 1/2 teaspoon of ground cloves. I'm going to add in just 1/4 teaspoon. In there. Lots of brown color. Really pretty, smells very fragrant. Wish y'all could smell it. And then what we're going to do is just whisk all of this together. At some point I'll use my hands, and my hands are washed. So this is also a very hand involved thing. You could use a potato masher if you want, or a fork if you don't want to have your hands so involved in the mix. But especially since this is going to be baked, it's okay if you use your hands without having to have on gloves and stuff. But it's really up to your comfort level. So we're just going to get all of that combined really well. And then, so I'm going to show y'all the vegan version, or the all plant-based version of this recipe first. And what you're doing is you're going to add in coconut oil. So this is you don't want to have it melted because you want it to be like a crumble. So you want it to be semi-solid, and it's pretty soft. So I can probably use the whisk for this to incorporate it well. and we're gonna add in 2/3 of a cup. So we're gonna scoop that in there like so. And just, you can either use your hand, you can use your whisk. Depending on how hard or soft the fat that you're adding is, you might wanna use your hands, but this is so soft, I feel like you can use the whisk, and it's pretty sturdy, and get it incorporated really well. And I'll show you what it looks like when it reaches the point. It's incorporated really good. So we're just gonna, I think I'll get my hands in here a little bit. Start to mix it since my hands are washed. I'm just gonna take off that. So that's not in there. And just kind of break up those pieces, kind of like if you've ever made biscuits or anything like that, and you really want to get it incorporated. And so this is going to be the foundation of our crumble that's going to go on top of the muffin. So what we're going to do is, once this gets really crumbly and you don't see like really huge little boulders of coconut oil, you're going to take out 1/2 cup. So I'm just going to sprinkle my hands off like that and just show you all so you can see. You can kind of see it's a nice crumbly texture. I'll show here too, that's a better view. Crumbly, kind of like rough sand. And since my 1/2 cup measure is a little wet, I'm gonna just put 1/2 measure of the mix in this cup. And that's usually about enough to sprinkle on all of your muffins. So we'll set that aside. And then what we're gonna do next, so we're continuing with our vegan version of the muffins. And instead of using eggs, so the regular version, the dairy full version has 2 large eggs in it. And instead of using 2 large eggs, we're gonna use 2 bananas. And you want the bananas to be a bit more ripe. So we have 2 of them. These are a little yellow. And you want them to be a bit brown, which you can achieve by putting in a paper bag a couple days. But if you're like, I want some sorghum muffins today, and they don't get super ripe, that's totally fine. You can still use them. They'll still function the same way. The main thing that the purpose that they're providing in this recipe is fiber and like holding as like a binder to hold the muffins together. So that's really what their purpose is. Because like I mentioned earlier, the leaveners are what's going to lift the muffins up. And usually an egg does all those things. It lifts the muffins, it binds them together. So whenever you're baking something that's vegan or not using dairy products, you just kind of want to have those different elements of what an egg would do naturally to bring it together. So what we're going to do is just mash these bananas up really well. I think I need a stronger spoon. This spoon was like, not today. But you can use a potato masher for them and get them really, and it's also a little easier when they're riper because they kind of just like melt into the bowl. So we'll just mash these up a little bit. We got this mashed up. You can always mash it a bit more, but I think we're gonna, once it starts to kind of have like a little mushy, squishy sound, pretty good. So I'll show y'all this. This is the bananas mashed up really good. And we're just gonna add that into our mix and add in just a cup of this. So this is for both recipes. And we're just gonna add in a cup, not 2 cups. Just gonna swirl it. So just add in 1 cup of the milk. And as you're doing this, you might look at the batter and be like, whoa, this is super thick, I should add more. But don't. You have to trust the process. It's gonna come together, I promise. So we'll just have that there. And what we'll do now is just bring the mixture together. And since this is a quick bread, you don't want to stir it beyond it being combined. You really just want to stir it just enough to get everything mixed, because otherwise you'll develop the gluten, which is a protein that naturally occurs with wheat flour. So if you were just using all sorghum, you wouldn't have to worry so much about stirring and gluten development, because most flours or most grains like sorghum, corn, they don't have any gluten in them at all. But when you're working with wheat flour, it has a level of gluten that if you stir it when it's agitated, it can make it tough. So if you want to have like light, tender, yummy, cake-like desserts or quick breads, like this is considered a quick bread, which is a category of baked goods that include cornbread, biscuits, things that you can kind of whip up without yeast. And you don't want to stir them too much. Otherwise, that's how you get stones instead of scones. So we just want to avoid that. Whereas when you're making yeasted breads, you want the gluten to develop, and that's how you get that kind of chewiness when you have like sliced bread and things. But with this, we don't want a lot of gluten. We want enough gluten that it has a crumb, but not that it's like, ugh. So I'm going to put this over here and we'll scoop out the muffins into the bowl in a minute. So the regular one, I have all of the ingredients already measured out. The flour is all the same. So I'm just gonna pour all of that into this bowl very carefully so that nothing spills. Okay, cool, achieved. And just whisk that together just to combine everything. This has the cinnamon, it's got baking powder, it's got baking soda, salt, and sugar. Only thing that's missing is our butter, our sorghum syrup, and eggs, and the milk, the remaining amount of milk. So what we'll do is we're just gonna measure out the sorghum syrup into here, 1/2 cup, same as the vegan version, like so. Just pour that in here. That. Scoop it out. It's really pretty. I think sorghum is really, it looks like black gold to me. It's very similar to molasses that comes from sugar cane or from beet sugar, the beet sugar production, but the flavor is slightly different. They both have a lot of iron and vitamins and minerals, which is why including them in things in dishes or desserts like that can be really good for you. So we got our sorghum in there. We're gonna add in 3/4 cup of butter. It's already chopped up here. So we have our butter chopped up. You can chop it up a little smaller if you want to make it a little easier. And it should be just like a little soft so that it can mix up nice and easy. So just get that in there. And then we're just going to stir that together. I might have to get my hands in here because this gets a little more soft. But my hands are clean, so good about that. Bring that back and just use your hands to really smush the flour, combine it, get everything combined in there really well, like so. A nice little like meditative task you can do, something that you can do the night before, or if you get up really early in the morning, if you're like an early bird like me and you're like, I'm about to make some muffins for the week, you know, you'll have tons of muffins depending on like your household size. Or like with me growing up, my mom would make, this is a variation on one of her recipes. She would make us muffins, and or I would get up really early and make muffins for like me and my 7 siblings. And this recipe would not make enough for us because it's only 18 and we all wanted like 3 or 5. But if you have a smaller household, you have muffins for a while. So I'm getting this crumbled up pretty good, really incorporated. You want the pieces to be like little smaller than a pea size. And just get that combined. And once that's combined really well, we're going to add in we're going to take out half a cup for the crumb for this as well. And then we will add in our eggs and our milk. But again, just going to wash my hands a little bit just to get the massive amounts of butter and flour off. Okay, so then we'll just take out our half cup of the dry mix, and you'll see it looks really similar to the other one that we did. Same thing, a nice little crumb, buttery chunks, be tasty, and you have it. Okay, just gonna put that there. And then for the main mix, we're going to add, and I'm going to crack these eggs into the milk just so that rather than right into the bowl, just so I can whisk them a little bit. Just have 2 large eggs. Gotta hit it with some gusto. Okay. So we're just gonna whisk that together. Just break up, I like doing this to break up the eggs so that I can reduce how much stirring I'm doing with the flours. So that again, we're limiting that gluten development by lessening the agitation or stirring that we're doing. So I do all that, mixing up the egg and breaking it up in the cup of the milk. And that can go in here, like so. Now we'll just stir it up just enough to get it mixed. So. All that well incorporated. And once you see it's together, you're like, all right, scrape the bottom, no flour pockets, we're good. So the next thing is going to be is to get it into our muffin tins. Just use you can use either a 1/4 cup measure or you can use a 1/3 cup. I think 1/4 cup usually will like a heaping 1/4 cup. It's kind of overflowing. Usually works pretty good for your standard muffin tin. And you're just gonna scoop it in there. So this one might have some little banana chunks, but I think that's good for it. This is a very nutrient dense muffin, I think. Make one of these and you'll be good for the day, at least until lunch. So we're just scooping this out into our tins. And we're going to do the same thing with the regular batch, the dairy full one. As neat as you can. Doesn't have to be. It's okay if it's a little spills. This isn't culinary school. We have our batter in the tins, and then you're just going to sprinkle them with some crumb. I like to press it so that, because sometimes I feel like when it rises, it sometimes spills off, and I'm like, where'd the crumb go? And it's on the side. So you can just give it a little gentle press, just to kind of really let the crumb know this is your new home on these muffins, not the tin. Okay, and then just sprinkle that on there. You can add more or less. Usually if I want to just do muffin tins, and then I'll put the rest of the batter in a loaf pan and sprinkle it with that. If I don't want to have like a ton of muffins and I'd rather have some sliced sweet bread, morning breakfast bread, you can do that as well. You just have to adjust the time a little bit if you're using a loaf pan. So we have these ready to go, and then you can get them into the oven. So we'll get those in there, and then we will also do the same with the remaining batter. the big map, and we can kind of see the placement of sorghum across continents, from Africa to the Americas. Primarily in the Americas, we're seeing it in like North America and South, and Appalachian region, which is kind of like from Georgia, Alabama, um, South and North Carolina, up into like the Appalachian region, used in some areas more or less than others. Where in the South, the southern states of the United States, sorghum was like the primary sweetener before sugarcane. The introduction of sugarcane into the Americas and the Caribbean, sorghum was used a lot for like syrup, molasses, sweeteners, as well as grains. So we're seeing that. And then we're also seeing, kind of going back, the origins of sorghum in East and West Africa. We see it being important to the Moro Kingdom, which are the indigenous folks, or the indigenous kingdom of those areas, or one of many, I'm sure. And how the Kushite people and the Nubian folks were the ones who were cultivating and taking care of sorghum and stewarding those seeds before they were forcibly brought, or in the diaspora, to the Americas and the Caribbean. So we're seeing that kind of like migration of seeds in that way. And then we're also wanting to recognize how prior to colonization, how sorghum or seeds were brought over to other regions. So we see sorghum used in Asia, in China, in India. We see that in China, they have like a distilled version of sorghum. You know, we got some fancy liquor that they've transformed it into. Whereas in India and other parts of Southeast Asia, used as like for breads a lot, roti, pancakes. So a lot of versatility, like Austin was saying earlier. And I'm sure it's moved even more to other places that might not have been recorded so much or noticed throughout time, but just recognizing the movement and importance and value of grains like sorghum and our understanding of plant stories and people stories. Them with a fork. You can also, I like to do the little bounce test where you kind of press them gently on top to see if they bounce back. And that usually means that they're done, because of like the batter is no longer a batter, it's a baked good. So that's one way you can test it. But if you're like, oh my God, I don't trust this yet, you know, you're developing your intuition about baking, you can like get a little toothpick or a little fork or knife and then poke that in there and then see if it comes out clean, and then you're good. And yeah, thanks so much for joining us, y'all. It's been really cool. Hope you like learned something new. Feel free to send us any pictures if you make a recipe or anything like that. We would love to share them on the DreamYard social media, as well as the Deep Roots social media. We love sharing what folks make of the things that we share in these workshops. So if you want to learn more about Deep Roots, you can find us on Instagram at Deep Roots, Deep_Roots, like the route, like the car. And you can also find DreamYard at Dream_Yard on Instagram. So you can follow all of the workshops, happenings, similar things like this. And I think there's more sessions coming up of the Farm to Table series. They'll be featuring other amazing chefs and dishes. So yeah, thanks y'all. And we'll have the muffins coming out soon. I'm gonna check and see if the muffins are ready. And if they're not quite, I might just take them out so y'all can see them when they're almost done and pop them right back in. But let's take a look. So we have the muffins there. You can see they're kind of a little bit shiny. These aren't quite done because when I press them, they kind of still sink in. Now, the other thing to note is this is a really moist muffin. So it is gonna have a little bit of give to it, but we want it to bounce just a little bit more. When we press it, we don't want it to sink. We want it to kind of be like, spring back, you know, like I'm here. But it's not quite doing that. So I'm gonna give it a bit more time. The surrounding areas it is, but the center part isn't so much. So we're just gonna give it like 5 or so more minutes. And we're just going to, these are the even ones, and we're gonna turn our dairy-full ones around. And the dairy-full ones are at the bottom, so they're cooking a little faster, but it's okay. A little brown caramelization, a little melanin, never hurt anyone. So that's totally fine. They'll be good. And once we get the the vegan ones, we'll switch them to the top so they're not getting as brown as fast. But yeah, thanks so much for joining, y'all. This has been great. Yeah.